Imagine finding out that your own mother, the person you trust the most, has stolen your future. I'm 20 and my mother is 40. She's been trying for a baby with my stepdad for years. But what if I told you that in her obsession to have another child, she betrayed me in the worst way possible? She drained my entire college fund, everything I had worked for, just to pay for a surrogate. And when I confronted her, she didn't even regret it. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. What happened next? A fight that no one saw coming, and a truth that shattered our family forever. Stay with me till the end because this story will leave you speechless. It was a rainy afternoon. I was home alone, my mother and stepdad out for yet another fertility consultation. I am 20 of age, I had grown used to their absences, their endless attempts to bring a new life into our family. I had always supported them, believing that their desire for another child was about love, about creating a family that felt complete. But that day, as I sat in the attic, surrounded by forgotten boxes and dusty memories, I stumbled upon something that would shatter everything I thought I knew. The attic was a place I rarely visited, a time capsule of our family's past. But boredom had driven me up there, and curiosity had led me to a small, unassuming box tucked away in the corner. It was labeled medical records, and something about it felt off. Why would my mother keep medical records hidden in the attic? Why not in her room or with the rest of the important documents? My hands trembled as I opened the box, and what I found inside would change everything. The first document I pulled out was a pregnancy test result, dated 3 years ago. My mother had been pregnant. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words, positive. But how? She had never mentioned a pregnancy. I had never seen her with a baby bump. My mind raced as I flipped through the rest of the documents, ultrasound reports, doctor's notes, and then, finally, a termination form. My mother had chosen to end the pregnancy. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, shock, anger, confusion. Why would she keep this from me? Why would she make such a decision without telling anyone? The reason stated in the records was chilling. Patient expressed concerns about the impact of the pregnancy on her relationship with her partner. My stepdad. She had been afraid that having a baby would affect her relationship with him. But why? What kind of man would make her feel that way? I sat there, the documents spread out around me, my mind spinning. I had always thought of my stepdad as a kind, loving man. He had been there for me since I was a child, always supportive, always caring. But now I couldn't help but wonder, was there another side to him that I had never seen? A darker side that my mother had been hiding from me? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront my mother immediately, to demand answers. But another part of me was afraid of what I might learn, afraid of how it might change our family. In the end, curiosity won out. I couldn't just sit there, knowing what I knew, and do nothing. When my mother and stepdad returned home that evening, I waited until he had gone to bed before approaching her. She was in the kitchen, making tea, her back to me. I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, we need to talk." She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with surprise. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice trembling. I held up the termination form, my hand shaking. "What is this, Mom? Why didn't you tell me?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her face a mask of shock and guilt. Then, slowly, she sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had just come crashing down on her. I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why would you keep something like this from me? Why would you make such a decision without even talking to me?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice breaking. "There's so much you don't know, so much I've been hiding from you." I sat down across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about, Mom? What have you been hiding?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "Your stepdad, he's not the man you think he is," she began, her voice trembling. "He has a past, a dark past that he's been trying to hide." My mind raced as I tried to process her words. "What do you mean? What kind of past?" She hesitated, then said, "He had a child, a son, from a previous relationship, but he abandoned them. He walked out on them when the boy was just a baby." I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. My stepdad, the man I had called my father for so many years, had abandoned his own child? How could he have done something like that? And how could my mother have stayed with him after learning the truth? Why didn't you leave him? I asked, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. She looked down at her hands, tears streaming down her face. I tried, she whispered. I tried to leave him once, but he convinced me to stay. He promised he would change, that he would be a better man. But the guilt of his past actions has haunted him and he's become controlling, paranoid. I've been so afraid of what he might do if I tried to leave him again. As I listened to her story, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, empathy. My mother had been living in fear, trapped in a relationship with a man who had betrayed her trust, who had abandoned his own child. And now she had been trying to have another baby with him, hoping that it would fix something that was broken. But I knew better. I knew that no amount of love, no amount of sacrifice could fix what was wrong with our family. The truth had been hidden for too long, and now it was time to face it, no matter how painful it might be. We need to do something, Mom, I said, my voice firm. We can't keep living like this. We can't keep pretending that everything is okay. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. What can we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. We need to confront him, I said. We need to make him face the truth. And if he won't, then we need to leave him. For good. She nodded slowly, her face pale but determined. You're right, she said. We can't keep living like this. We need to do something. As we sat there in the kitchen, the rain still falling outside, I knew that our lives were about to change. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. But I also knew that we were stronger than we thought, that we could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be pain, there would be heartbreak, but there would also be hope. Hope for a better future, hope for a life free from secrets and lies. And as I looked at my mother, her face filled with determination, I knew that we would face whatever came our way, together. The days after my discovery felt like walking through a fog. Every time I looked at my stepdad, I saw a stranger. The man I had called my father for so many years was not who I thought he was. He had a past, a dark, hidden past, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. My mother's confession had only scratched the surface, and I needed to know the full truth. One evening after dinner, I found myself alone with my stepdad in the living room. My mother had gone to bed early, exhausted from the emotional toll of the past few days. I sat across from him, my heart pounding, the words I wanted to say stuck in my throat. How do you confront someone who has been a part of your life for so long? How do you ask them to explain the unexplainable? Dad, I began, my voice trembling. Can we talk? He looked up from the newspaper he was reading, his expression calm, almost indifferent. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I found something in the attic, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Medical records. From a few years ago. His face froze for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, fear? Guilt in his eyes. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by his usual calm demeanor. Oh, he said, his voice casual. What kind of medical records? I hesitated, then said, records of a pregnancy. Mom's pregnancy. From 3 years ago. There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought he might deny it. But then he sighed, setting the newspaper aside. I see, he said, his voice heavy. I suppose it was only a matter of time before you found out. His admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected denial, excuses, anything but this quiet acceptance. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice rising. Why did you keep this from me? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness I had never seen before. It wasn't my decision to make, he said. Your mother, she didn't want anyone to know. She was afraid of how people would react, how it would affect our family. But why? I demanded. Why would she be afraid? What aren't you telling me? He hesitated, then said, There's more to the story than you know. Things that I'm not proud of. My heart raced as I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. What things? What are you hiding? He looked away, his face filled with guilt. I had a child, he said, his voice barely audible. A son. From a previous relationship. But I walked out on them. I abandoned them. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. My stepdad, the man I had trusted, the man I had called my father, had abandoned his own child? How could he have done something like that? And how could my mother have stayed with him after learning the truth? How could you do that? I asked, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. How could you just walk away from your own child? He looked down at his hands, his face filled with shame. I was young, he said. I was selfish. I thought I could just start over. But the guilt has haunted me every day since. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, empathy. My stepdad had made a terrible mistake, but he had also been living with the consequences of that mistake for years. And yet, that didn't excuse what he had done. He had abandoned his child, and nothing could change that. What about Mom? I asked. How could she stay with you after learning the truth? He sighed, his shoulders slumping. She tried to leave me, he said. But I convinced her to stay. I promised her I would change, that I would be a better man. But the truth is, I've been living in fear ever since. Fear that the past would catch up to me, fear that I would lose everything. As I listened to his confession, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. My stepdad had been living a lie, hiding his past from everyone, including me. And my mother had been living in fear, trapped in a relationship with a man who had betrayed her trust. We can't keep living like this, I said, my voice firm. We need to face the truth. All of us. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with fear. What are you saying? I'm saying that we need to confront the past, I said. We need to find your son. We need to make things right. He shook his head, his face pale. I can't, he said. I don't even know where he is. And even if I did, he would never forgive me. You don't know that, I said. But you owe it to him to try. You owe it to all of us. As I sat there, looking at the man I had called my father, I knew that our lives were about to change. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. But I also knew that we were stronger than we thought, that we could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be pain, there would be heartbreak, but there would also be hope. Hope for a better future, hope for a life free from secrets and lies. And as I looked at my stepdad, his face filled with guilt and regret, I knew that we would face whatever came our way, together. After the confrontation with my stepdad, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. His confession about abandoning his son had left me with more questions than answers. Who was this child? Where was he now? And why had my stepdad never tried to make amends? I knew I couldn't just sit back and let the past remain buried. I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I decided to start my investigation by reaching out to the only person I thought might have some answers, my stepdad's ex-girlfriend, Sarah. I didn't know much about her, but I remembered my mother mentioning her name in passing once. With a little digging online, I managed to find her social media profile. My hands trembled as I sent her a message, introducing myself and explaining that I needed to talk to her about something important. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. I've been waiting for this day for a long time, she wrote. Let's meet. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in the city. As I walked in, my heart was pounding. I had no idea what to expect. Would she be angry? Resentful? Or would she be willing to share her side of the story? When I saw her sitting at a corner table, I was struck by how ordinary she looked. She was in her late 30s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. But there was a sadness in her expression that told me she had been through a lot. You must be Emily, she said as I approached the table. I've heard a lot about you. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, I said. I know this must be difficult for you. She sighed, her eyes filling with tears. It's been a long time coming, she said. I've been waiting for someone from your family to reach out for years. As we talked, Sarah told me everything. She and my stepdad had been in a serious relationship when they were younger. They had been happy, or so she thought, until she got pregnant. First, my stepdad had been supportive, but as the due date approached, he became distant. And then, just a few weeks after their son, Ethan, was born, he walked out on them. He just left, Sarah said, her voice breaking. No explanation, no goodbye. He just disappeared, leaving me to raise Ethan on my own. I felt a lump in my throat as I listened to her story. How could my stepdad have done something so cruel? How could he have abandoned his own child? Did he ever try to contact you? I asked. Sarah shook her head. Not once. I tried reaching out to him a few times over the years, but he never responded. It was like we didn't exist. As I listened to Sarah's story, I knew I had to find Ethan. He deserved to know the truth about his father, and I wanted to make sure he knew that he wasn't alone. With Sarah's help, I managed to track him down. He was living in a nearby city, working as a mechanic. I reached out to him, explaining who I was and why I wanted to meet. First, he was hesitant. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he said. It's been a long time and I've spent most of my life trying to forget about him. But after some convincing, he agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a park, a neutral ground where we could talk without any pressure. When I saw Ethan for the first time, I was struck by how much he looked like my stepdad. He had the same eyes, the same smile. But there was a hardness in his expression that told me he had been through a lot. I'm Emily, I said, extending my hand. It's nice to meet you. He shook my hand, his grip firm but not unfriendly. Ethan, he said. I've heard a lot about you. We sat down on a bench and I told him everything. About my stepdad's confession, about my mother's struggles, and about my decision to find him. As I spoke, I could see the emotions playing out on his face. Anger, sadness, confusion. I don't know what to say, he said when I finished. I've spent my whole life wondering why he left, why he never tried to contact me. And now, I don't know how to feel. As we sat there in the park, I knew that our lives were about to change. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. But I also knew that we were stronger than we thought, that we could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be pain, there would be heartbreak, but there would also be hope. Hope for a better future, hope for a life free from secrets and lies. And as I looked at Ethan, his face filled with a mix of emotions, I knew that we would face whatever came our way, together. Through meeting Ethan, I knew it was time to bring everything to a head. The secrets, the lies, the pain, it all had to come out. My stepdad needed to face the consequences of his actions, and my mother needed to see the truth for what it was. I arranged a family meeting, telling my stepdad and mother that we needed to talk. I didn't give them any details, but I could see the fear in their eyes as they sat down at the kitchen table. What's this about Emily? My stepdad asked, his voice tense. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. It's about Ethan, I said, watching as his face paled. I found him. I met him. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan, she whispered. Who's Ethan? I turned to her, my heart breaking at the confusion on her face. Ethan is Dad's son, I said. From a previous relationship. He abandoned him when he was just a baby. My mother's face crumpled, and she turned to my stepdad, her eyes filled with betrayal. Is this true? She asked, her voice trembling. He looked down at the table, unable to meet her gaze. Yes, he said, his voice barely audible. It's true. The room erupted into chaos. My mother was crying, my stepdad was trying to explain himself, and I just sat there, watching as the family I thought I knew fell apart. It was painful, but it was also necessary. The truth had been hidden for too long, and now it was out in the open. How could you keep this from me? My mother demanded, her voice shaking with anger. How could you let me believe that you were someone you're not? My stepdad looked up at her, his eyes filled with guilt. I was afraid, he said. I was afraid of losing you, of losing everything. I thought if I kept it hidden, it would just go away. But it didn't, I said, my voice firm. And now we have to deal with the consequences. A few days later, I arranged for Ethan to meet the rest of the family. It was a tense meeting, filled with awkward silences and painful conversations. But as we talked, I could see the walls between us slowly start to come down. Ethan shared his story, and my stepdad listened, his face filled with regret. I'm sorry, my stepdad said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry for what I did. I know I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. Ethan looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions. It's going to take time, he said. But I'm willing to try if you are. The road ahead was not going to be easy. There were still wounds that needed to heal and trust that needed to be rebuilt. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. We were no longer hiding from the truth, and that meant we could start to move forward. My mother decided to take some time apart from my stepdad to figure out what she wanted. I supported her decision, knowing that she needed space to process everything. As for me, I started to build a relationship with Ethan, getting to know the brother I never knew I had. As I looked at my family, broken but slowly healing, I knew that we were stronger than we thought. Truth had set us free, and now we had the chance to build something new. Something real. Past would always be a part of us, but it didn't have to define us. We could learn from it, grow from it, and become better because of it. And as I sat there, surrounded by the people I loved, I knew that we would face whatever came our way, together.